The air inside Harbor Fresh Market carried a warm draft of cardamom and citrus, the kind that makes even fluorescent light feel forgiving. I moved without hurry, choosing apples that kept their bloom and pears that yielded a little at the neck. I had meant to buy flowers, then thought better of it. Fruit would last, and nobody could say no to something that fed the table. The basket creaked faintly as I set it on the checkout belt, my fingers lingering over the weave like it might steady my nerves. My pension never stretched itself. I've learned to make it presentable, folded bills in an envelope, coins sorted into a jar by the door so that even scarcity looks neat. I dug for the right combination as the cashier drew the basket toward her. She was a slight woman with clipped gray bangs and a name tag that read, Helene, the sort who notices everything and speaks only half of it. She swiped the fruit and the small jar of honey I couldn't resist. When I slid my card across, she paused, her eyes lifted from the plastic, sharper, curious. "You're Evan's mother, aren't you?" The question landed gently, but something behind it made me straighten. "Yes," I said, "Miriam Hale." She held my card a second longer than necessary. The line behind me hummed scanner beeps, a child asking for gum, the squeal of a wobbly wheel, and yet the sounds thinned as Helene leaned closer, her voice falling to the kind of whisper people use at hospital doors. "I shouldn't say this," she told me, but be careful. The Navarros aren't what they tell folks. Their people come in here, Wine Prime Cuts imported this and that, and I keep hearing about how much your son helps." Her fingers, cool and dry, touched my wrist as if to anchor the words there. "Just watch." A small shock went through me, not from offense, but from recognition of a fear I hadn't named. I searched her face for mischief or malice, and found none, only the resolve of someone tired of biting her tongue. She let go as if nothing had passed, slid my card through, and told me the total, as though we hadn't stepped sideways into a different conversation entirely. I signed, thanked her, and shouldered the basket. Outside, afternoon light lay flat on Bayview Avenue. The sky was a blank slate, the kind our part of the sound gives you before rain decides whether to come. I kept walking past the main doors, past the cart corral, and a stack of flattened boxes someone had tucked against the brick, until the store's side entrance clicked shut behind me. Out back, the air smelled of cardboard and wet rope. 2 delivery trucks idled with the resigned patience of working things. I tucked myself beside a row of recycling bins, the fruit basket pulled against my chest, the wicker pressing a pattern into my sweater. Through the chain-link fence, the backlot opened like a little stage. I didn't intend to spy. I told myself I was breathing, collecting myself. Yet I stayed. A pale SUV rolled in and settled into a spot near the loading ramp. It looked recently detailed. Even in the gray, the paint threw a dull sheen. The driver's door swung open, and Caleb Navarro stepped out. I recognized him from photos on Nadia's phone, a careful man whose shirts always lay just so. He was slimmer than I expected, tanned, the kind of grooming you don't achieve by accident. Reduced hours, Nadia had said. Setbacks. The kind of words that make you feel unkind for asking follow-ups. Caleb moved briskly to the rear and lifted the hatch. Inside sat 2 glossy shopping bags stamped with the name of a home store I'd seen but never entered. Linden & Company, the kind that arranges linen like it came down from a mountain spring. He angled the bags with one hand and slid them into the back seat, careful as if they held glass. His phone rang. He answered without checking the screen. Laughter. First voice, easy, free of the sandpaper that money troubles bring. "We're confirmed for the series," he said. "Lower bowl." "No, not the nosebleeds." "Row B. I'll send the transfer tonight." The words lifted over the lot. He listened, chuckled, glanced at his reflection in the dark of the passenger window, and pressed a fingertip along his hairline, the way men do when everything is in order. My spine pressed harder into the brick. Only that morning, Nadia had told Evan that her father's clinic bills were stacking again, that the roof leak hadn't been fixed, that they'd make do if they had to. Make do, and yet the world Caleb occupied glinted at the edges, row seats, heavy bags, a car that had never seen a gravel driveway. He closed the hatch with the measured quiet of a person who expects things to close properly. Then, as if he had merely paused between errands, he went in through the sliding doors and vanished back into the bright aisles. I stayed where I was until the idling trucks cut their engines, and the muffled store music floated out, a tinny song from an era earlier than mine. Then I walked home, the basket heavier than it had any right to be. By the time I reached my building, a fine rain had begun, the kind that decorates a window more than it wets a person. I set the fruit on the kitchen counter and didn't unwrap the honey. My apartment held the tidy silence I've cultivated over years, a kettle that takes its time, a table large enough for bills, and not much else, a narrow cupboard of cups that all match by accident. I reached for the ledger I've kept since Evan was born, black cloth cover, worn smooth at the corners. It began as a habit during my years at the dry dock payroll office, on shoreline columns, tallies, numbers laid straight so life might follow. Old reflexes relaxed slowly. I dated the page. I wrote Harbor Fresh Market and the amount in the left column. Then I opened the envelope that holds my month and counted the cash once again, a third time for ritual. My pension had landed the week before. I'd already peeled off what was needed for heat and the co-op dues. Medicine lived somewhere between those two, shuffling its feet. When my husband died, Evan was still small enough to be lifted without making a show of it. I worked long and I worked careful. There were years of bus tokens counted on the porch, of buying the brand that comes in a plain bag, of skipping lunch, because nothing tastes better than seeing your kid believe the world might be generous. Those habits do not leave you, they only soften at the edges. Even now, I track kilowatts like they are guilty animals, and pills like they might multiply if watched. And even now, more times than I planned, when Nadia called in tears or apology, I found the edges of my envelope and weakened them. A prescription not covered, a landlord impatient, the power company with its firm notices and bland font. Just until Friday, she would say just this once. I'd tell myself that's what people do in a family lean, lend, lift. It felt like memory, like duty's gentler cousin. Helene's fingers on my wrist lived in my skin, as if she had pressed a seal there. Careful, they aren't what they tell folks. I tried to blow the words off like dust, then remembered the bags, the voice over the phone, the kind of ease that doesn't share a room with genuine worry. I closed the ledger and laid my palm on it, as if I could smooth the day into balance. The rain thickened and made its lace on the window. At the streetlight, a woman in a red coat lifted her hood and hurried across the hem, catching a splash. A translucent grocery sack flashed pale against her boots. The world kept at its errands. The kettle began to mutter, then to sing, and I poured water over a tea bag until the color ran. On the table, the fruit sat beautiful and brazen. I thought of how small gifts negotiate their way into awkward rooms, how baskets and pies and jars of jam translate our better intentions. I had wanted to show up with something that said peace. Instead, I had come home with something that asked, prove it. The ledger waited, the envelope was lighter, and the steady hum of the building's heater reminded me that some mercies can be measured. I washed one apple and ate it standing up. It crunched clean and ordinary. When it was gone, the core in my hand felt like a little diagram of a choice, seeds I hadn't planted, rooms I hadn't entered, questions whose answers would not change the ledger, but might change where I put it. I rinsed the sink, wiped the counter, and took the basket to the hall closet, where I keep extra light bulbs and the screwdriver that fits most things. I set it on the second shelf, the fruit still in it, the honey still wrapped, and closed the door. In the quiet after the latch caught, the apartment seemed to pull itself into a smaller, truer shape. The rain tapped a steadier rhythm. I sat down again at the table, opened the ledger to a fresh page I did not fill, and listened to the water in the pipes as it found its way where it was meant to go. By morning, the rain had rinsed the sidewalks clean, leaving the city the color of a polished stone. I made tea, opened the ledger, and did not write in it. The fruit basket waited where I'd left it in the hall closet, still padded with the brown paper the clerk had tucked around the pears. Around 9, Evan called to say he'd swing by at noon before heading across the bridge. "They're expecting us," he said. "Nadia's making a late lunch." When he pulled to the curb, I slipped the basket onto my lap and settled into the passenger seat. He looked fine if you weren't his mother. Shirt ironed, hair combed, jaw shaved, but there was a way his eyes stayed a fraction of a second too long on the dash, as if reading a warning light that wouldn't come fully on. The heater clicked through its cycle warm air, lifting a strand of my hair, and for a few blocks we spoke in a register meant to keep the morning simple traffic on 6th, a food truck that had closed a memory about a summer when we ate cherries so cold they shocked our teeth. The Narrows rose ahead of us, a green arch all laid over the water, like a careful hand. The sound below had that slate shine it wears when the wind pulls east. Evan drove with both hands a habit. From his father, shoulders level, attention pinned to the lane lines. They've had a week, he said, and scratched at a spot just under his collar. Dad's pain meds are a mess. Nadia says the clinic keeps changing things. He glanced at the basket on my knees. That looks good. Fruit goes anywhere, I said. Better than lilies. Lilies make people think of funerals. He laughed a little, but his fingers flexed on the wheel. The Navarros lived in a quiet pocket, past a row of cedars where the road thinned to something you would not drive at night, unless you knew it. The house wore new paint, the color of driftwood, a fresh stripe of stain along the porch rail, and bark mulch that still held the shape of the bags it came from. A pair of Adirondack chairs faced the driveway, as though they had been expecting an audience. When we pulled in, the garage door stood open on a neat geometry of shelves and bins. An electric mower sat polished enough to reflect the ceiling bulbs. Nadia opened the door before Evan killed the engine. She wore a loose blouse, the blue of swimming pools, her hair smoothed into a long tail that swung when she moved. She kissed Evan, hugged me lightly, and took the basket as if it were delicate rather than ordinary. You didn't have to, she said, and set it on a console where a small forest of candles flickered with the faint scent of fur and something sweeter. Mama's dozing. Papa's watching a game. Come in, come in. The living room had changed since I'd last sat there. The old sofa, plaid and patient, had been replaced by sectional pieces covered in a pale fabric that made me afraid to sit down with anything that might stain. A new rug anchored the room, patterned with lines that made the floor look like a map. Framed art leaned into the wall, a gallery of soft abstracts in sand and steel. Near the window stood a coffee table topped with a stack of thick books about houses and other climates. An espresso machine the size of a small suitcase gleamed on the kitchen counter. Its chrome polished an arm for steaming milk, waiting like a question. On the back deck, a grill with more knobs than a piano. Nadia saw my eye move and smiled. Floor model, she said easily. My friend at Linden & Company gave us a heads up when they rotated stock. And the coffee thing points from a corporate promo. Caleb did. He consults on retail layouts sometimes. We only pay for beans. Caleb himself drifted in a minute later, a glass in one hand, and a kitchen towel over his shoulder, as if he'd been conducting something rather than cooking it. He wore a soft jacket, the color of smoke, and loafers without socks. You made it, he said, and kissed Nadia's temple. Almost called to say we'd push to next week. Your mother wasn't sure about her stomach today, Miriam, but she rallied. He lifted his glass. To family. A platter appeared halibut under a crust of herbs and breadcrumbs so fine they melted. Asparagus done with capers and lemon. A salad with pomegranate seeds lit like little lanterns. A tray of bread from one of those bakeries that sells bread like it's jewelry. Eat, Nadia said, moving plates with a dancer's confidence. I overdid it. We'll balance it with fruit, I said lightly, and set the basket on the table as if it could defend us from abundance. Talk flowed along the grooves people use when they want to demonstrate normalcy. Caleb mentioned a client in Portland who couldn't decide whether he wanted brass or nickel, and so had paid to see both installed and swapped out. Nadia told a story about her mother insisting on hanging copper pans as if they'd come straight from Europe, when, as Nadia cheerfully admitted, they had come from an online marketplace and a seller who boxed them in yesterday's sports pages. Money appeared often at the edge of these stories, always explained away by context, employee discount, refurbished gift card points, a friend who owed a favor. Every gleam had a past attached that made it seem practical. Evan ate smiled at the right moments and rubbed his temple with his ring finger when he thought no one saw. He answered questions about his project at work, without texture the way men do when they are trying to locate the line between pride and exhaustion and keep it to themselves. When Nadia touched his forearm and said, "We'll be back on our feet soon," he nodded in a way that looked like agreement, until you noticed how shallow the nod was, how little neck muscle it used. Caleb topped glasses, sparkling water for me, something pale and citrus for the others, and said, "We've had some good news. A little bump in one of my accounts. Not much, but it helps." He held my eye as he said it the way people do when they want to preempt a question. You know how it is, feast or famine." He smiled as if famine were a style choice. I lifted a forkful of fish and found it excellent. The thing about careful food is that it allows you to think while you eat. The coffee machine let out a growl. Caleb tamped a puck of grounds as neatly as a man folding a pocket square. Cups appeared small and white. "Let me," he said, and pulled 3 shots as if he were auditioning for elegance. Evan raised his to his lips and left it there inhaling like a person who believes in caffeine the way other people believe in saints. Afterward, Nadia brought a plastic shoebox to the table with a rattle of twist ties and receipts and coupons, the way some families bring out a baby photo album. "I'm trying to get organized," she said, and laughed at herself. "It's chaos in here." She plucked through until she came up with a coupon for a brand of detergent that never goes on sale. "Use this," she said, pressing it into my palm. "It's about to expire." I thanked her and folded it into my wallet next to an old library card I hadn't used in years. It felt as if she had handed me something else entirely and asked me to pretend it was detergent. We stayed a little longer, then hugged our way back to the door. Nadia packed leftovers for Evan in boxes with tidy lids. "For your lunches," she said, and kissed his cheek. "Promise me you won't skip." On the porch, the new chairs shone the way new things do when they have just been bought out of want rather than need. Evan set the boxes in the trunk. I carried the empty basket. Caleb lifted 2 fingers in a relaxed farewell and watched us back down the drive. On the bridge, the wind had shifted. The water below showed a skin like hammered tin. Evan drove carefully, the boxes sliding softly when we turned. "They're trying," he said. "It's a lot." "I'm sure it is," I said, and folded my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see that they wanted to wring themselves. At home, my apartment met me with the ordinary mercy of familiarity. I set the basket on the table, boiled water for tea, and told myself to rest my face. The phone lit at 5 with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then opened the message. The first photo was a register receipt from Harbor Fresh, the kind printed on smooth paper that curls at the edges. Imported seafood triple cream cheese wine with a label I recognized from a magazine Evan once left on my coffee table. The total looked like a week of my groceries, and the date stamp placed it 2 days before Nadia's last call, asking if I knew how to speed a payment to the utility company. Another image followed a credit card statement screenshot, Maison Celeste Cosmetics, a charge that could have bought a small appliance and left change. A note line counter gift with purchase. The third photo showed 2 heavy bags with a Linden & Company logo, the kind of bags that crease and still insist on being called totes. A fourth image flashed. Beneath it, a line of text. "You don't know me. I'm Eli. We've met in passing. I stock nights at Harbor Fresh. I shouldn't interfere, but I keep seeing things that don't square with what I've heard in line. Your son seems like a good man. If I'm wrong, delete this. If I'm right, I thought you should see." There was no flourish, no request. The photos had the plainness of documentary evidence and the impropriety of spying. I set the phone down and picked it up and set it down again the way you do with something warm that you can't decide whether to hold. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water and let the tea sit. Outside, a bus sighed at the stop. Someone ran for it and missed laughter rising, as if missing the bus were sport. I opened the drawer with envelopes and stamps and took out a manila one I'd used for recipes. I slid the phone into my palm again, saved the images, and printed them on my old machine that coughs before it produces anything. The paper came out warm. Warmth makes evidence friendlier than it ought to be. When I had 3 pages, I stacked them and sat very still until the radiator spoke. I did not know Eli beyond a nod in an aisle near canned tomatoes. I did not know what risk he took, or if it was any risk at all. I only knew that numbers have a way of insisting on their own story, and these numbers told one that had very little to do with coupons about to expire. There was a knock a little after 6. I opened to Agnes Morrow from down the hall, a woman in her 70s with hair the color of doves, and a memory that could beat a computer in a game of dates. She carried a tin the size of a hat box. "Oatmeal raisin," she said. "I misread a recipe and there's no sense in waste." She glanced past me as I thanked her and stood on the mat as if it were charged. "I ran into that pretty daughter-in-law of yours on Saturday, Clearwater Galleria, at the perfume counters. She left with 2 bags that could drown a person. My niece works over there, knows who's who. Says the girls are regular and very nice. Agnes smiled the way people do when they offer a garnish to a story they suspect you already know the entree to. Well, I'll see you. After she went, I put the cookies on the table beside the envelope and didn't open the tin. The apartment felt tiled with small squares of silence. I slid the printed photos into the envelope, then took them out, then slid them back again. I addressed the front with 3 words for Evan's eyes and set it where the light from the window found it. On Sunday, Evan texted walk. The kind of question that doubles as a favor and a respite. We met at Titlow Park where the water slaps the old pilings like it's teaching them to keep time. The wind came up from the south and brought with it a taste of salt. We went along the path that keeps one eye on the sound and one on the fringe of madrona and fir. For a few minutes we didn't speak the way people don't when they are tuning to the same frequency. "You working late?" I said finally. "Some," he said. "Quarter close. Plus, extra never hurts." He said it lightly, then kicked a pebble to give the sentence somewhere to go. "Nadia said the clinic's been difficult." I kept my voice low as if we were in church and we didn't want to wake a child. "Papa's had a rough stretch." He tucked his hands into his jacket and hunched a little against the wind. "We're juggling. It'll even out." I slipped my fingers into my coat pocket and touched the edge of the envelope I'd brought. The cardboard rasped against my skin. "Do you ever feel you're carrying more than your share?" I asked. It was not an accusation. It came out like a question you ask in a kitchen when everyone else has gone to bed. He stopped and looked at the water. A gull hovered as if held by string tips of its wings gilded where the light poked through. "Someone has to," he said. "They've done a lot for us. It doesn't make sense to keep a tally." He lifted his chin a little. "It's not about fairness." "I know," I said, "but fairness isn't the only word we have." I did not add more. The envelope felt ridiculous in my pocket, like a prop in a play where the scene had not yet made room for it. "I can handle it," he said, and offered me a smile just crooked enough to break something in me. We walked on. A boy in a bright jacket skidded around a puddle, shrieked, recovered, laughed at himself. A dog argued with a crow and lost. We turned at the point where the benches face an open slice of water sat and let the wind do its small work on our coats. He told me about a meeting that had gone sideways for an hour and then righted itself in 10 minutes, the way meetings do when the person who can fix the thing finally shows up. I told him about Agnes's cookies, which were probably soft rather than crisp, which is a shame, but you can't tell a neighbor how to bake. We clucked our tongues at a fairy that honked twice like a joke between friends. The envelope waited in my pocket and stayed there. On the way back to the cars, he squeezed my shoulder. "Thanks for the fruit," he said. Nadia loved the peaches. Mama ate a whole pear like it was proof. Proof of what I said. That things can be sweet for no reason. He laughed at himself. "That sounds dumb." "It sounds like a thing someone says when he's very tired," I answered, and he didn't argue. At home, I put the envelope in the shallow drawer where I keep spare keys and a flashlight that only works if you shake it. The ledger sat open to a clean page. I sharpened a pencil, wrote the date, and let the tip hover. The radiator clanked, then softened. Outside, the hallway door opened and closed with the careful thud of a person not wanting to be heard. I poured a glass of water and drank half and set the glass down on a coaster that has a faint ring from a day when I let a glass sweat. I lifted the drawer and set the envelope beneath it, where the wood fits over a lip. Then I slid the drawer shut and tried not to listen to the sound it made as it settled. The apartment returned to its exact size. The kettle sang its small song. Somewhere in the building's bones, water moved with purpose, found joints traveled, and came to rest. I stood in the middle of my kitchen and counted backward from 50, the way I do when my mind wants to gallop. When I finished, the clock on the stove had not changed. I washed the 3 cups I had used that day, set them to dry, and pulled the cord on the blinds. The city outside arranged its lights like a quiet argument. The phone rang just after dark, the sound small and insistent against the hush of my kitchen. Evan didn't bother with hello. "Can you come by?" he said, and whatever he had been holding out of his voice for weeks had fallen straight through it. I took my coat from the hook and left the lights as they were. His building smelled faintly of laundry soap and a neighbor's onions browning. He opened his door before I knocked twice. The living room was neat, the way tired people keep things surfaces cleared, dishes stacked to dry the couch blanket folded with blunt care. He said something on the coffee table and stepped back as if the distance might steady him. It was a soft-covered planner, linen gray elastic band, frayed a little where a thumb might worry it. A pen clipped to the front with tidy teeth. On the first page, a name in round letters, Nadia Navarro. I touched the cover. It felt harmless. I was looking for the car keys in her tote, Evan said. We share a spare. This was in there with a cable and some receipts. He swallowed. I haven't read all of it. I opened where the elastic fell. The pages had been loved corners, smooth dates, written out in careful script, small boxes ticked in neat lines. Rent due. Power bill urgent. Mom meds short. Some entries carried amounts in the margin circled. Others wore little stars. Beneath a few, in a fine, unshowy hand, a line that did not quite belong to a budget. Remind him family is everything. Mention Dad's back. Call when he's at work. Cry if needed. I turned more pages than I meant to. The dates landed like stones. I knew weeks Evan had come home later than late months, my ledger clenched narrower than it should. Here and there, a different ink noted Linden Hold. Season ticks due. Maison C gift while purchase. As if appointments could be commemorated like ailments. Evan's hand flattened against the back of the sofa. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, he said. Maybe it's how she keeps track. Maybe it's a record, I said quietly. What it records is plain. He sat. The couch sighed the way furniture does when it knows it is being asked for more than comfort. He pressed his knuckles to his mouth and let them fall. It's like being told a thing I already knew and didn't know how to say. We didn't speak for a few minutes. The neighbor's television climbed into a commercial and back out. In the hallway, someone rolled a cart and laughed once surprised by their own noise. Where did you find it? I asked. In her bag, he said again, then shook his head. She left it on the passenger seat and I brought the tote up. It was open. I saw my name. His throat worked. I don't want to be the kind of man who searches. You aren't, I said. Something found you. He stood and walked to the window like he could ask the night a question. The glass gave back his shape thinner than he is in daylight. I need to hear it from her, he said at last. Not in pieces, not smoothed. He looked down at the planner and then at me. Will you come if I ask? If you want me, I said. He nodded. He didn't pick up the planner. He didn't have to. The room rearranged itself around it the way rooms do when an object changes what they're for. He called Nadia from the kitchen, speaking slowly to keep his voice level. I heard only his side, but the pauses told their own story. When he hung up, he said tomorrow. Outside. She doesn't want Mama to hear us. He rubbed his temple, then caught himself doing it and dropped his hand. Caleb's coming. Of course he is, I said, and he laughed without humor. The next day, the sky wore a color gravel would envy. We met at a cafe on the Point Ruston waterfront, a place that makes you feel like you're on better terms with the water than you are. The patio tables were bolted to the deck against the wind. People sat with collars up, paper cups steaming. Seagulls walked their old patrols with professional solemnity. Nadia arrived first, a wool coat thrown over leggings, sunglasses laced into her hair. She carried a tote I recognized leather soft with practice. She kissed Evan's cheek and reached for my shoulders. I let her hands land and drop. I wish we were inside, she said brightly. It's freezing. We won't be long, Evan said. Caleb came a minute later, phone in one hand, jaw set. He greeted us as if habit alone required it. His coat was cut so well it scolded the wind. Evan didn't sit. He placed the planner on the table and a stack of printed pages beside it, anchoring them with a salt shaker. I found this, he said, voice even but not flat. These two. He tapped the receipts. I need you to explain. Nadia's mouth open, closed, tilted. That's private. It's about me, he said. It can't be entirely private. Caleb reached for the planner with 2 fingers, flipped a few pages, and set it down with the same precision. He looked at Evan as if they were at a negotiation, and the number had just been named. Budgets are messy, he said. Feelings get written where numbers belong. We all keep lists we don't admire. Nadia laughed, a small, brittle sound. Evan, you're making this into something it isn't. I track bills. I write reminders because I forget things unless I see them. The notes, she gestured. That's how I talk to myself when I get anxious. It's not strategy, it's coping. Call when he's at work. Evan read finger steady on the ink. Use Dad's back. Family is everything. He pointed to a date and an amount. You asked for rent that day. 2 days before you spent more at Maison Celeste than half our rent. He slid a photo of the Linden bags across the table. You told me the couch was a floor model. It was, she said too quickly, mostly. Caleb arranged it through a friend. We paid. She stopped. We paid a little, but it was a steal. You know how retail works. I know how numbers work, Evan said. He wasn't loud. The quiet of it shook more. Caleb folded his arms. You're embarrassing your wife in public, he said. Is that the man you want to be? Evan looked at him, then back to Nadia. I don't care who's watching, he said. I care that every time you called crying, I took another shift. I care that my mother pulled cash from her month to help yours. I care that you built a script around that and wrote it down like a recipe. Nadia's face went pink at the edges. Your mother never liked me, she said, turning the words like a blade until they flashed. She's been against me since we met. Now she has you. Congratulations. This isn't about my mother, Evan said. This is about you and me, and the truth. He put a palm on the planner as if keeping it from lifting. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm misreading. Tell me you didn't plan which story to use. Nadia's eyes moved over the water and back, looking for a place to put her version. For a second, something like apology flickered across her face, then shuddered. We needed help, she said. You wouldn't have understood if I'd said we're fine, but we want more than fine. You like rules, you count. I knew what would make you say yes, so I used it. She lifted a shoulder. We're married. We're supposed to pull together. That's what this is. Caleb sighed a careful exhale. Don't moralize about a system you benefit from, he said to Evan. You were reliable. We relied. In any other context, we'd call that a network. Here, because you think you didn't consent enough, you call it theft. He spread his hands. It's not theft. It's how families survive. We put on a little polish because the world treats polished people better. Is that a crime? Evan didn't move for a moment. The gulls made their small jokes among themselves, and the wind picked up a napkin and carried it to the railing. He closed the planner gently, the elastic band snapping into place with a small, decisive sound. He gathered the receipts into a stack and squared the corners. When he spoke to both of them and to no one else. Enough. The word landed on the metal table and sat there. Nadia's hands, which are capable of tying a scarf, so it looks like it learned French, lifted and dropped. You can't mean that, she said. I do, he said, and the steadiness of his voice made her blink. No more overtime to float stories. No more cash because you found a reason that can't wait. No more phone calls at work asking for what you already bought. He slid the envelope I had addressed for Evan's eyes from his coat and placed it with the others. I don't need this to know. I brought it so you'd understand I'm done needing proof. Caleb's smile thinned to almost nothing. This performance makes you feel clean, he said. Give it a week and you'll be back. You're not built for cold. Evan looked at him the way he looks at a spreadsheet that thinks it has a trick. I'm built for work, he said, and for what I can stand in the mirror. Between those, I'll be okay. Nadia reached for him, then not with tears, but with a precision you see in people who have practiced the move. Her fingers closed over his sleeve gentle, the way you hold someone you plan to keep. Please, she said, let's not do this here. He eased his arm free without a jerk. We just did, he said. He lifted the planner, then changed his mind and left it on the table. Keep your book, he added. I don't want to carry any more of it. We walked away. The wind hit us clean around the corner of the cafe and took our breath for a second. Evan's shoulders set not high the way fear holds them, but level the way decision does. At the curb, he stopped as if remembering where the ground begins. Come with me, he said, and I followed him to the car because that was the right distance. Back at his apartment, he unlocked the door without looking at his hands. Inside, the light from the window pressed a pale rectangle onto the floorboards. He set the leftovers from the other day, the ones Nadia had packed on the counter, and stood looking at them, then opened the fridge and placed them on a shelf without tenderness or malice, just a movement done by a person who understands that food and feelings are separate species. He took the planner pages he had printed and slid them into a folder along with the photos. On the table, the coffee ring from last week had faded to a whisper. He wiped it anyway, slow a circle within a circle. Then he reached into the dish where he keeps change in a paper clip and pulled out a key on a plain ring. He turned it once in his fingers, felt its teeth, and set it between us. "Hold this for me," he said. I closed my hand around the metal. It wasn't heavy, but it had weight. The building's pipes knocked once and then were quiet. Evan sat, and the chair made that human sound chairs make when someone finally uses them the way they were designed to be used. He exhaled. It was not relief. Relief is light and stupid. This was something else, denser, duller, honest. "I'm going to sleep now," he said, looking not at me, but at the rectangle of light on the floor, which had traveled a little. "In my bed, for whatever time is left in this day." "All right," I said. He stood, touched my shoulder, and went down the hall. The apartment, freed from needing to perform, took its true shape again. I placed the key in my purse, not the little pocket where pretty things go, but the inside space where serious things live. I washed a cup and set it upside down on a towel. From where I sat, I could see the folder on the table close square, waiting for nothing. Outside, the city gusted and fell back, and the windows held. By noon the next day, I was in the passenger seat again, the city bright with that rinsed light you get after weather changes its mind. Evan drove to a low brick building on Pacific Avenue, where the gold letters on the directory were rubbed bare by years of fingers. The elevator made a noise like a polite throat clearing and opened on a hallway that smelled faintly of copy paper and old carpet. The attorney's office had one window and 2 chairs and a view of the alley's sky. Her name was Rhea Calder, small and exact, a woman who placed a pen parallel to a legal pad as if alignment made hard things easier. She asked Evan to tell her in his words what brought him in. He did, steady enough that only the muscles in his jaw told on him. She nodded twice, wrote sparingly, and slid across a checklist that looked mercifully ordinary. Freeze, automatic transfers, close. Joint cards, separate, phone accounts, change direct deposit file, petition for legal separation. "We'll stage the steps," Rhea said. "Quickly, but not sloppily. Banks first, then the petition. I'll draft and file. You'll bring me statements. I'll need your signatures on a handful of these." She tapped the stack with one finger. "None of it is dramatic. It only feels that way." He read each page before signing. He called the bank while she watched the clock to be sure the fraud department stayed on the line long enough. He canceled an auto payment and removed an authorized user with a voice that did not wobble. When he signed the petition, his hand moved slower for a second, like a person stepping onto a new surface and learning its give. Rhea slid each document into a folder with calm hands, the kind that keep coffee from sloshing. "You'll get noise," she said, closing the folder. "Let it be noise. If there are threats, document them and send them to me. If there are pleas, let them be pleas. Don't answer anything that isn't a question you need to answer." She looked at me then, as if introducing me to the work I'd already started. "He'll need quiet rooms and punctual meals. He'll forget to feed himself, not out of penance, out of habit. Don't let him live on coffee and apples." "I won't," I said. Down on the street, the wind curled around the corner and tugged at my coat hem like an insistent child. Evan held the folder under his arm and unlocked the car with the same key that had been in my purse last night. He passed it back to me without speaking, and I put it where I keep serious things. The phone rang halfway home. He put it on speaker and set it face down in the console. Caleb's voice came in smooth, practiced a man trying on a neighborly tone. "Buddy," he said, "a quick bridge. 2-3 days tops. A transfer is hung up bank nonsense, and the clinic has a discount if we pay this afternoon. You know how bureaucracy works. I'd ask your mother, but it's cleaner if it comes from you." Evan checked his mirror as if his answer might be hiding in the blind spot. The folder on his lap slid a little when we took a turn. He said Caleb's name as if confirming the connection, then no. A pause, polite, then sharpened. "I'm not asking for charity," Caleb said. "I'm asking for an advance. We're family." "No." Evan repeated, "No more." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He ended the call and let the car fill back up with the sound of its own engine. At my apartment, I made soup the way you do when your hands want a job that will not fight back. We ate at the small table with the folder between us like a guest. He took the planner pages out once, looked at them without reading, and put them back. When he left, he checked the door twice, not because he feared anyone outside it, but because the business of securing things is contagious. Over the week that followed, the shape of his life changed on paper first, and then in the room. He moved a stack of shirts and a box of books, and a clock that ticked softly into a rental near Wright Park, a building with tall windows and a stair that complained but did not give way. The first evening there, the radiator worked. The second, it hissed and went sulky, and a man with keys came and thumped it into good behavior. I sat on the floor while Evan put plates in cupboards that would memorize them. He leaned a broom against the wall and said he'd forgotten how brooms are a comfort. When he slept there the first night, he texted me, "Good morning at 6, as if reporting that the sun had consented." He started keeping eggs again, and bread that isn't sweet, and a jar of mustard no one else would choose. The dark half-moons under his eyes faded a little. The set of his mouth softened by degrees. He laughed once, really laughed, at a picture of a dog dragging a stolen baguette down a sidewalk with its whole heart. The laugh surprised him. It surprised me less. At home, I opened my ledger to a page I'd left blank and wrote nothing for a full minute, letting the pencil warm in my fingers. Then I listed the basics and drew neat lines between columns the way I always have. When the month's bills were squared, I took out a thin folder that holds my will and the other papers people don't want to keep near the stove. I made a correction in my hand slow and legible and called a witness from the building whose signature has steadied many a neighbor's form. On the desk beside the folder, I placed a second envelope labeled with a short name, Harborline Senior Advocacy. It's a small outfit here that answers phones no one else wants to answer. I wrote a modest number on a pledge form and felt the strange quiet that follows choosing a number that will not fix a single thing and will nonetheless be useful when it is needed. The key lived in my purse for a while, wrapped in a handkerchief with a blue border. One afternoon, after I'd watered the plant that refuses to die, I threaded the key onto a thin chain and lifted it over my head. It rested where a pendant might play not for show metal against skin, a small fact. Evan came by on a Friday with takeout and a draft from Rhea that required initials on 3 lines. He ate half his dinner and saved the rest as if saving were a new pleasure. We didn't say Nadia's name or Caleb's. Their absence did not need filling. He told me the radiator at his place had learned manners. I told him Agnes had started leaving her mail on my mat when the envelopes look unfriendly. We argued gently about whether pears belong in salad. When he left, he put his hand on my doorframe in the old way and checked that the latch caught. It did. Days arranged themselves into the smaller variety of ordinary. On Sunday afternoons, we walked the park loops where damp leaves make a subdued confetti. If rain started, we didn't run. At night, my window took the city apart into squares of light. I read Mended. I seemed sharpen the good knife, cleaned the kettle with vinegar until it remembered to shine. The folder sat in my drawer, then in his desk, then in Rhea's file room. Papers move the way rivers do when they know their route. Once Caleb passed us on a sidewalk downtown. He looked at Evan and reassembled his face into a version he might have used at a sales floor, affable, persuasive, credible. He didn't speak. Evan didn't either. They stepped around one another like men who have learned the radius of their own bodies and respect it, later weeks or months' time not announcing itself. I found the fruit basket in my hall closet where I'd left it. The paper had relaxed. I took it down, washed the shelf dust from its weave, and set it on the table. I bought pears and a jar of honey and arranged them as if I were teaching the basket to remember its purpose. When Evan came by, he started to say, "You shouldn't have then took a pear and bit it, as if proof were a thing you could taste." That night, I locked my door with the key on its chain. The click was the same as it has always been. The air carried the faint sweetness of a grocery store I could walk to if I wanted, and somewhere in the building, water passed cleanly through a pipe and into a place designed to receive it. I turned off the lamp. The window held its square of city. The room took its exact shape and kept it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.